Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Star Wars The High Republic Out of the Shadows. So this is the second YA novel for The High Republic. This is the YA novel from Wave 2. Into the Dark, of course, was the one from Wave 1. And this is what we have here. They seem to be sort of offsetting the YA books in comparison to the middle grade and the adult novels, in that this takes place what seems like a few months after the events of Rising Storm and also Race to Crash Point Tower, which was, I think, a kind of similar point with the first wave. But anyway, overall, what I have to say about this, most of this review is going to be spoilers, so I'll just really quickly go over my general thoughts here. Was that, again, I really like the book, and I think in general, The High Republic hasn't really had a miss so far. Obviously, there's been a bit of variety in the books, but in general, they've all been, I think, really, really good. Especially the main books, the YA and also the adult novels. To me, they've all hit. This one, I suppose, I think it will end up maybe being the first one where you maybe have a little bit more of a discussion about, like, did this do enough? Did it not do enough? You know, those type of things. Because you look at the cover and you're like, okay, Vernestra, Wreath, and a new character for this book. This is Sylvester. Or just Syl, and then you have Nihil in the background. Sounds kind of cool. That, okay, Wreath, I'm into Wreath because he was the main character in the first YA book, and Vernestra is probably, like, in a way, like the fan favorite kind of younger Jedi of the High Republic. What can go wrong? I think the problem that perhaps happens in this book is that Wreath is effectively a non-factor in, like, the entire book. He has one or two fun character moments, but for the most part it feels like the writing just, they no clue what to do with him in this book. He's here because we've decided to group these characters together, and we have to spend so much time doing other stuff that we don't really even get that much opportunity to do all that much. In that, this exact kind of moment of, like, Wreath and Vernestra sort of fighting side by side doesn't really happen in the book. In that, they have a couple of scenes together right towards the start of the book, but then after that, like, Wreath just, stuff happens to him and he's just kind of taken out of the story. Even his master, Comac, gets to be a little bit more of a focus than he is. Vernestra obviously fares a lot better in that she's sort of the main Jedi character of the book, but overall what you would say is that she's not even the main character of the book, that is Syl. And that's the first time that we've really seen this specific dynamic happen in one of these books, where it's actually sort of the unique, newly introduced character who gets to sort of be the spotlight character for the book. And that's maybe where I think this maybe falls down a little bit, because if you were to say, like, obviously it's Syl and Vernestra are basically the two main characters. You also have sort of Jordana in the book as well, but Syl and Vernestra, you'd say, are slightly above her in terms of the pecking order of this book. And the only thing I'd really have to say about that is just that I felt coming out of this book that I wanted more from, like, a lot of the Jedi characters, including Vernestra. Even though they do some stuff with her towards the end, which we'll get into in the spoiler section, I felt like there could have been more of just, like, an arc with her in this book. I get the sense that they're more building up to something, and in I suppose Phase 2, Phase 3, they'll get to some big things with Vernestra. And for now, it's just like, okay, kind of just character, you're just spending time with them so you get to know them better, and a few things happen. But still, fun, enjoyable. She is one of my favorite characters in the High Republic, and that continues here. It's just, for her first, I suppose, main sort of featured role in one of the books, because obviously, like, you don't expect too much from one of the middle grade books, and she stood out in that one, but it's a middle grade book. There's a sort of expectation I wanted a little bit more, and I did feel she was a little sort of overshadowed, where it felt like the writer, like, Syl was sort of the writer's sort of almost like pet character, and that's the character that they really wanted to focus on, and I'm kind of like, can we go back to Vernestra a little bit? Not that I disliked Syl as such. I just thought Vernestra is a much more interesting character than kind of Syl was overall. In that I think Syl's mother is a more interesting character than Syl herself. And while I won't mind if Syl and Jordana come back at some point, and I think they will. I think that's sort of where the kind of setup for them is, that they'll appear at a moment when they're kind of needed. At least they're developed coming out of this. But I didn't feel like their arcs, where you'd say they actually got the full-on sort of character arcs of this book. I would have preferred that maybe one of the Jedi characters had a proper arc to them as well. The other character here is that Nan is in this book on the Nihil side of things. She's effectively the main sort of Nihil character. Not that there are too many chapters that focus on her. She, I thought, also was a little disappointing here in terms of like Wreath. Basically the Into the Dark connection here. I felt like there was a kind of it was just thrown in here, and they really didn't have much to do. Or they didn't want to move them along too much because they're just referencing and they're setting up stuff for later on. Not that I was expecting like huge things to happen, but like it was honestly surprising how little Wreath was involved, how little Nan was involved, and especially when it came down to it, their scenes where they actually interact again felt like zero importance was placed on it, basically. I was really baffled by the way that was done. But in general, like, I suppose, like, that stuff out of the way, just the characters. The plot, I thought, was actually quite interesting in that, if I was to really just, simply explain this, it's that this plot goes more into the whole hyperspace prospecting business from the past. So we know the San Tekkas are involved in that. That's the whole Mari San Tekka thing from the past. We add in an extra layer on top of that with this other hyperspace prospecting family, the Grafs, like the main rivals of the San Tekkas. And so you basically have these two other factions, like, kind of now in this. And that's what this book felt like it did. We have sort of the Nihil, you have the San Tekkas as like the well-off, family who, made their fortune hyperspace prospecting, who is, doing things the right way with the Republic and so on. And then you have the Grafs, who are, similar in a way to the San Tekkas, but they're a little bit more sort of showy, show-offy. They're forming deals to sort of get extra stuff out of it, in a way like sort of the good millionaires and the bad millionaires type thing. That seems to sort of be the way they're sort of presenting the Grafs here. So you sort of, you kind of have a sort of, oh, cool, like I like the San Tekkas. There's a few things, there's some secrets going on there, but in general, they seem to overall have people's best interests at heart. The Grafs, on the other hand, like, you can tell there's a lot of scheming going on. And that's the main thing that this book does in terms of what it introduces from a world-building perspective, is through Syl interacting with a member of the Graf family, we delve more into, hyperspace becomes more of a plot point. Like, the paths that the Nihil use is sort of referenced again. Mari San Tekka, again, is used here more heavily as a plot point. But to go down a slightly different angle with hyperspace to, I suppose, set up more stuff that will happen down the road. But, but overall, I would say, you maybe finish reading this book and feel like, okay, that's cool. A lot of it is mainly set up for the future. There's not many sort of things that I think happen in the plot of this book that you just feel like, boom, I experienced a massive part of the story. This is like, okay, there's a few nice moments and it's mainly set up for the future, which is fine, but it's probably the book that most felt like that, I'd say, mainly set up. So that sort of introductory stuff out of the way. Let's jump into sort of full spoilers here. So what to talk about here first? I suppose let's get into Vernestra, because I suppose she's the character I think most people want to know about, and so on. So Vernestra's interesting, and obviously she has a Padawan here. The dynamic with this character is that she passed her trials at a very young age. She's super, super capable, and it's not a mistake that she passed her trials. She actually is just skilled enough that she did it. She sort of surprisingly gained a Padawan in a test of courage, and so she has this dual dynamic of both proving herself that she was earned the title of knight, and now also proving that she, deserves to have a Padawan at such a young age, and that she can do it all, and that everyone views her as being sort of hyper competent. That is justified. So that aspect of her character does get sort of addressed here, as you see that she and Imri are getting on well, but because he has this unique ability, being like an empath, and he's sort of realized that that power has unique things to it. He's began to learn how to sort of, in a way, smooth over people's emotions. That he can kind of use the Force to not manipulate people's emotions, but to kind of calm them down. And Vernestra's a little bit concerned about this, that even though he's doing it from a good point of view, trying to help people, there's always that little bit of a, you are altering people's emotions, and is that a good thing or not? And because she doesn't have the same ability as him, how can she help him? So, a lot of that dynamic is just, they're sent on a mission, so she can't really deal with that right now. In that the resolution is just when the mission comes to an end, at the end, she finds a Jedi who has a similar skill and asks for his help, and he teaches Imri some kind of meditations and like basically exercises to do to better learn how to control his empathic powers. So that seems to have been more or less resolved in terms of like you don't really come out of this questioning Vernestra as a master as such, because she is skilled enough to teach him a lot of the basics, and this was just a little bit of a challenge about how to handle the empath powers. That's fine. The other things that they deal with in this book are that they surprisingly brought up the idea, like I think they brought up in Race to Crash Point Tower and so on. She still hasn't told her master, Stellan Gios, about her modifications to her lightsaber, that is now a light whip. Now, by the end of the book, there's something else that she sort of kind of keeps hidden to herself that is sort of a bit more important. But they still have her really focus on the idea of like, should she tell him about it or not? He's a stickler for the rules, so she's worried that her master, who she greatly respects, will, give out to her for this because her lightsaber is non-regulation or whatever. It's sort of meant to be a bit of a moment of growth for the character, that by the end she kind of figures that he's my former master, I'm a knight, that it's a moment of growth for her, that she sort of can accept that there are some things she can keep from him, that she's decided as a knight to modify her lightsaber. She doesn't need to tell him as such. Now, I'm guessing that it will come out eventually, word will make its way, or she'll eventually tell him about this. And I can't see Stellan, the type of character that he is, like having too much of a problem with it, if it's effective and hasn't like impacted anything. Especially because, like, I suppose the fear would be that it's more of a weapon, I suppose, typically associated perhaps with the Sith. It's more, I guess, focused on maybe a bit more offensive focused. But Vernestra in combat very much is in control. And you wouldn't really be fearful of her with this weapon going too far down a path where she's being overly offensive and killing people and so on. That's not really a fear with the character. So it really is just like, I suppose it's just like she kind of is she fearful of being scolded by her former master, whereas as a knight she shouldn't be? Is that the thing they're going for here? And we'll see as they go forward. I was just surprised to see it brought up so many times. Of course, over the course of the book, you do get a few characters kind of mention, like, we're dealing with a very adult situation here. Why are you bringing kids in on this mission? And, like, because she is a knight, she can be considered the main Jedi on a mission. yet people see her and are like, I thought a proper knight was coming to help us, but you've just given me 2 children. And obviously we know she's super competent, but that's something that she has to deal with. In most instances, she ends up proving herself to pretty much everyone around her, but it's always something that she does have to deal with, and you see that it does frustrate her, even if she, again, is usually always able to keep her kind of composure. And she has to, basically deal with that with like Zyle and Graf when she kind of meets him, especially. And so on. It's just that sense of she still is somewhat inexperienced. The main point in the book that you would say is actual potentially proper character growth is probably the only really significant moment in the book that involves Wreath's master Comac, in that after a sequence where basically the senator whose daughter Vernestra saved and kept alive in a test of courage, brings her into the room during a meeting with Zyle and Graf. It comes to light that, the senator basically used the Jedi as this sort of gotcha moment against Xylan, and Vernestra didn't immediately realize that from a political kind of point of view in terms of their argument, because they're 2 high up people. She didn't realize that the Jedi were being brought in to big up the other one. It's this sense of like she kind of feels like, maybe I am inexperienced, and why are Wreath and Comac being assigned to the same mission as me by Stellan? Does he not trust me? There's a little bit of that doubt that comes in, and Comac talks to her about this, and it's just like, look, I know you want to ask me the question, does he not trust me, that sort of thing, but no. I was assigned to this purely because of the sort of politics involved. That the Jedi Council doesn't really know what the situation as such is, with what the senator wants to do, what the Graf family wants to do, and because you are inexperienced, we're just here to sort of monitor that as well. He has full confidence that in terms of the actual mission, you can accomplish it. He's just very wary about, stuff like this sort of happening. So they managed to kind of talk around that effectively. But Comac does have a really honest moment with Vernestra where he says, like, your master did you no favors, in a way, like rushing you to become a knight so fast. And I don't fully agree with you being given, being allowed to have a Padawan at such a young age. But he does say it's not because, like, you're not a good Jedi. And it's not because you are not a good master to Imri, but it's because your trajectory as a Jedi, I can't see you being able to like maintain this sort of upward trajectory that you're on right now. And I suppose they don't really go into it too much, but I suppose it's this idea of she's on the up and up. How will she handle when she sort of stalls a little bit? That sort of thing. When she actually encounters a true challenge that she doesn't know what to do, how will she handle that? And I suppose this is the setup as we go forward, because we don't really see that happen in this book. It's just that, are we waiting for a big moment where we maybe get to see the flaw or weakness of Vernestra as we go forward, and has Comac maybe latched onto the idea of, everything's gone roughly well for you so far, but what will you do when you handle a true moment where you're dragged down? That's the big question there. But, in general, Vernestra, I think, is written well in this book. I just wish they'd maybe touched a little bit more on some of these ideas, because as much as it seems cool I'm describing this, these are literally moments that happen within like individual pages in the book. And this book is like, how many pages is it? It's like over 400 pages long. And, it's a handful of pages that really the big moments come out in. The big thing for Vernestra, though, that I think people are going to remember from this book is she begins to get hyperspace visions, and it's revealed that this is something she has dealt with since she was a Padawan. That when they would go on long hyperspace space travels, she would effectively have hyperspace visions. They describe it as like her spirit kind of leaving her body and her like appearing in a different spot. And the way they show that here, as she has them again, is that she basically travels to the Gravity's Heart, which is the ship, the weapon of the Nihil that is the plot point of this book, and basically is in contact with Mari San Tekka through the Force and through hyperspace. And this is key because one thing that happens at the start of the book is that it's revealed that Mari San Tekka, there's one item that Marchion Ro has that she actually kind of likes, and it keeps her in line. Nan loses it on a mission. The Jedi end up finding that on their mission. So they have this sort of cube that is important to Mari San Tekka. And that's sort of an aspect of how the connection is formed between the two of them. In addition to, I suppose, maybe them making the point that the ability that Mari San Tekka has, which is super unique, and it basically won the hyperspace prospecting, battles, I suppose, for the San Tekkas over the Graphs, and also led to her being wanted and sort of why she was, I suppose, captured by the Ro family. And it just helps to paint the picture now of like, okay, here's a bunch of factions from back in the past during the prospecting days. San Tekka's, Graphs, and then you have to remember the Ro family are the ones who I suppose kidnapped her in the first place. So how did they link into everything? That's all like fascinating to me when they finally come around to, I suppose, presenting Marchion Ro's backstory and like how his what's going on with his father and so on. But yeah, they connect through the Force, and we have this kind of it's a mystery, like what is this box about? Later you find out is that it's sort of it's got markings on it that are old prospector markings, which one of the older members of the Graph family unlocks later on, and it's revealed to be a sort of kind of hollow vid of Mari San Tekka when she was younger, and that's what she kind of latches onto, that's what she remembers. The net result of all of this is that through this hyperspace connection, Mari San Tekka gives Vernestra a path, one of the paths that she usually gives out to the Nihil. She gives the final path she will ever give out to Vernestra. And they just describe it as, because of how it's done through this connection, this is this path that Vernestra will always remember. It's like a part of her now. She has this path. And this is the final thing that she does, because this book sees the death of Mari San Tekka, which has been set up since Light of the Jedi, that she was on her last legs, basically, barely being kept alive. And this is where we see the death of her, which is kind of cool. Now, after everything that happens here, Vernestra does not reveal to anyone except Imri, I think, that she has this path. She makes the decision that right now she's not really sure what what anyone would do with this in the middle of everything that's happening. So she decides to keep the path to herself until there's a better moment. And I ultimately think this is probably a decent decision for her, because there's a kind of undertone throughout the book that like Vernestra is questioning, like everyone is, what's going on with the Jedi in terms of they're fighting against the Nihil, and it's getting serious enough to where it feels like the Jedi are at war with the Nihil. And there's a big question of like, are we becoming soldiers in this? Also, the mission that we're on is very political business in nature. This is not what the Jedi usually do, because again, we're not in the prequel era. So this is actually a unique mission at this point in time, that they're being given a mission that relates to a sort of Trade Federation-esque faction like this. And again, you're beginning to see the seeds being planted. We saw them in the Rising Storm at the end, of Stellan working with the Chancellor, and the Chancellor places him in this position where he's sort of the commander of the Jedi against the Nihil, leading somewhat of a war. Now we're sending multiple Jedi out to assist high up political factions in their deals and exploits, and through Syl and like Joanna, you get the perspective of like, oh, Jedi are involved in this stuff now, but they're not helping outlying systems as much. But it just highlights that they're stretched thin because of the Drengir, they're stretched thin because of the Nihil. They can't do what they did in times of peace, and we're beginning to sort of see the High Republic, I suppose, iteration of what happened to the Jedi during the Clone Wars, which it's happening subtly in the behind the scenes, and certain Jedi are beginning to sort of notice this and realize that this might be a bit of a problem. But I like that's actually being written, I think, pretty well overall. That is sort of the direction that we are heading in, because there's a lot of stuff that happens here, that definitely. So I mentioned Mari Santeca. Let's go into that stuff. How is she on this other ship? I thought she was on the Gaze Electric. Here's what happens. So it's Lorna D, actually, who's the one who says, oh yeah, I'm working, my Tempest is working on this new technology. I have this scientist who thinks she's unlocked this ability to sort of use a gravity well projector to pull ships out of hyperspace. And Ro obviously is interested in this. And she makes the point of, like, now that she knows about Mari Santeca, a plot point from Rising Storm, she's like, if you give me access to the Oracle for a certain amount of time, my scientist can perfect this weapon, and this is something the Nihil can use, and we can be as best as possible. Now, he ultimately agrees to this, and he sends Nan along with Mari Santeca. Nan is meant to basically look after Mari Santeca while she's in the possession of Lorna's Tempest. The big reveal here, obviously, is that the scientist turns out to be Chansey Yarrow, who is Syl's mother, who, at the start of the book, you get the idea that, like, Syl's mother died in a Nihil raid not that long ago. And the massive reveal for her over the course of the story, through meeting the Graf family, is that, oh yeah, there's suspicions that your mother is, like, behind a lot of this stuff, that she's this secret hyperspace, like, expert that you never knew about, and she has massive reveals about her mother over the course of the book, and it helps to explain aspects of her childhood and so on. But anyway, that's the whole idea here. This is where, like, the end of this book has a bunch of reveals, like, that happen boom, 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 really, really quickly, because you think, okay, the Nihil, here's a new Nihil enemy, I suppose, here, Chansey Yarrow, Syl's mother. She's working with Lorna on this weapon. But then by the end of the book, the Gravity's Heart, which is the weapon, it gets destroyed. And the reveal at the end comes out that, like, yeah, everyone was aware of this weapon because of a couple of specific instances where ships were pulled out of hyperspace. But it was basically just, I think they say, 4 instances being blown out of proportion by the Graf family. One of them being the attack where Syl's mother kind of died, and so on. So this weapon barely worked, and this was all manufactured by the Grafs, by Lorna, to make Marchion Ro interested in it, so that they could perfect this technology by getting a hold of the Oracle. So this is sort of this secret plan by Lorna to sort of betray Ro, to kind of gain power herself. Because by the end of the book, you find out that the Graf family, who's been doing stuff with the Republic and are obviously this sort of questionable group, different than the Santeca family, you get the reveal that, yeah, okay, like, Xylan Graf has been allied with the Nihil this whole time, that yeah, he was sort of shady this whole time, but that, yeah, Chansey Yarrow is actually just allied with Lorna at this point, and they plan to betray Marchion, and that she is now going to work with the Graf family to perfect this gravity well technology and sort of gain control that way. The other thing here is that this means that Nan, her main interaction throughout this book is mainly with Chansey Yarrow. And this is where we'll get into the whole thing with Nan, of, like, I appreciated what they were doing here in that they get across that she basically worships Marchion Ro. She looks up to him so much. She does everything she does is just to try and please him, get in his good books, and she feels like, oh, I've been given a very dangerous task here. It's important, but it's so dangerous because if this woman who's like 100+ years old dies, I'm going to be blamed for it. I'm going to be killed. And so she kind of questions things a little bit. But then there's this very interesting dynamic between Nan and Chansey, where Chansey obviously doesn't like her sort of over the top sort of nihil ways, as she's just, Nan is very easy willing to kill people. But she sort of sees something in her because she's young. And I'm guessing I sort of sensed a little bit here that there's this sense of, because she has a daughter who's, I suppose, effectively the same age as Nan, she sort of latches onto her in a similar way. That Chansey was very interesting because she seems to do everything that she does to protect her daughter. But even though her daughter, when she finds out the truth, doesn't go along with her, she then sort of latches onto Nan a little bit and is just like, you come along with me. You can be much better than worshipping Ro. You could make so much on your own or by joining us. And so by the end of the book, the big reveal with Nan at the end is that she also is, to survive, willing to go along with the Graf family and become their informant. They didn't go into a lot of details here, but I get the impression that they're maybe planning on waiting a little bit with Nan and maybe sending her back into the Nihil and then to be an informant to the Grafs. I wasn't too sure about that, because like they basically just warned her against, you shouldn't go straight back to Ro because you've failed. Mari Santeca is dead. This is not going to go well for you. So we'll work with us now, come up with a story, and be the informant going forward. So she's willing to just tell them everything here. She's finally sort of, in a way, out on her own, working for herself, and this is meant to be this kind of moment of growth in a way. I would have been a little bit more on board with this if they just did more with her. Because I felt like the worship thing with Marchion I didn't quite get from previous moments with her in previous books. So to introduce that and then go past it in the same book seems like strong development, but then I think it happened a bit too quickly for me. And then just by the end, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm interested in where they're going here, because they've effectively created this third faction in everything. The Jedi are against the Nihil, and then the Nihil are sort of helping to plant the Drengir around. We don't really know what's up with the Drengir at this point. But now there is the Graf family also beginning to sort of build their own sort of power in the system, I suppose. What exactly they're planning to do once they have the gravity well generator, I'm not sure. They're into shipping. So is it just they'll make money by being able to pull other ships out of hyperspace, but they'll be the ones to benefit from it? Not really sure. But it creates this whole other faction. And especially with the way they talk at the end about the Nihil, it gives you the impression that the Nihil as we know them is destined to die. That the Jedi do have a massive advantage ultimately over them. The Nihil have suffered loss after loss after loss. Tempest Runners are getting taken out. He's constantly having to replace them. And you can tell, like, just by the fact that they mention in this book, he's gone off on his own again, Marchion Road, on this journey somewhere that we don't know about. So I guess this is another Great Leveler sort of journey type thing. He's setting up something else that is beyond the Nihil, and seems fine with the Nihil basically kind of almost falling apart around him. And their prediction is just that within the next couple of months that they're going to pretty much win. Because I think they literally say that even though this is sort of Lorna's faction, that the Grafs are convinced that within the next few months they will find Lorna, who they believe to be the Eye of the Nihil. And I think there's even a point in the book where the matriarch of the Grafs even is the one to reveal to them that Lorna is the Eye of the Nihil, which obviously is not true. That they're purposefully going to let Lorna be captured, because it doesn't feel like they're betraying Lorna in all of this, because it actually feels like Chansey and her are actually close. So I'm actually very interested to see where that goes, because there is the Lorna D sort of audio thing coming out, because it's not a book, it's just an audio kind of piece that's coming out, I think, at the end of this month, that I guess will delve into that, because that's where we're going. It seems like all but assured that Lorna is going to get captured. Where does that go? And with her maybe out of the picture and now all but confirmed to betray Marchion, it means that Marchion himself is really the only main villain left, because the others aren't loyal to him, and they've killed off all of the more notable Tempest runners. So I think it's just interesting to see where he goes. Like, the Great Leveler is a big thing, but what's going to be the twist, I suppose, going into these phase 2 and so on, phase 3 with Marchion? Obviously, they've kept him as a mystery in terms of we don't know what his species is. They've been very careful with his exact backstory, only teasing connections with this and that. So there's so much still to be revealed with him, and they've furthered that here, and now introduced this whole other faction, which I'm not really sure what they're going to do with it. So there's that. So with that I've covered Vernestra, Imri's arc. I basically covered Wreath, Comac as well. Oh yeah, Nan and Wreath. Like I said, they meet on the station towards the end, but they make such little deal out of the fact that these two characters have met again, in that it's borderline like an off-screen moment where you're focused on another character and they just overhear like Nan saying like, "Wreath, what are you doing here? I can't believe I keep like encountering you in these instances." And they're in the same scene together. They're all sort of helping each other out for a little bit, and there's no back and forth between them. And I didn't know what to make of it, just because, like, are we meant to associate those two as actually having a strong connection? Or did they, in this moment here in this book, want us to just dismiss it as like, yeah, their connection was literally just in that book. They saved each other's lives and that was it? Because earlier on in the book, Wreath sort of has a moment where he thinks about Nan and remembers that he kind of had a crush on her, and he felt that, oh, maybe there's something going on here. So I'm not really sure about that. That said, in the very same book, he also establishes that he sort of has a crush on Vernestra. Again, they don't really do anything with that. It's just he sort of blushes a few times around her, but, you know, that's fine. They get across, I think Vernestra is not at all interested in kind of romance at all. So, you know, that's all fine. But Wreath and Nan, I felt like that's kind of important. Now, at the very least here, this means Nan has made the decision, separate from Wreath, to actually leave the Nihil. So her ally, who she's allied with, is very different now than it was before. So maybe she does actually care for him. Maybe this opens the door to that being a thing, maybe down the road, depending on where they go with Wreath. I was just so shocked to see how little importance they placed on that dynamic. And literally all that they did here was the two of them have that moment of like, what are you doing here? And then like Imri, I think, is the one to ask, how do you two know each other? And they just quickly explain that, yeah, on the Amaxian station, yeah, we saved each other's lives. That was it. And they're like, great. Like, thumbs up and move on. Which I think brings us to, I suppose, Syl and Jordana. You know, I'm leaving these to the end, even though, like I said, like, Syl is the main character in this book. And it's fine, like, it's a good arc, like, they give her enough time to actually develop and stuff like that. It's just, I feel like this sort of has maybe some of the problems of some of the old Legends books in the past, where it's like, you know, this is a book that features Obi-Wan quite heavily, but actually like 60% of the book is focused on these new characters that they've just introduced. That's kind of what happened here, where like, I like Syl. They established that, you know, she's this young, you know, person just who ships goods around the place. That's her. She's a hauler, basically. She's struggling with the loss of her mother. At the start of the book, you find that she's also struggling with the recent breakup with her girlfriend in the past, Jordana. So that, of course, comes up because I mentioned Jordana already. And she just is going along with things. Things aren't really going her way. She's a little bit in debt. Then her ship gets taken by another Nihil attack, and this, and her being sucked out of hyperspace again, is what brings her into play basically here, by coming into contact with Xylan Graf, who is obviously this young member of the Graf family, of course, who are very interested in stuff that relates to hyperspace. Now, it's interesting when you reflect on this early stuff from the book with the reveals later on, because Xylan was fully entrenched with the Nihil and knew what was going on with Chansey, the mother, the whole time, but he never told this to her at all. So it's this really interesting dynamic where he basically uses her over the course of the book just to be able to have someone who knows what happened in hyperspace, because he wants to improve the reputation of the Graf family, gain access to certain parts of space that the senators can give them, and so on. But of course that doesn't work, and you get all this sort of stuff going on. But the main thing here is just like the contrast between her, who's this very sort of hard character who is used to struggling so much, just trying to meet ends meet, when she mainly interacts with Xylan Graf, this rich person over the course of the whole book, and then suddenly goes on this adventure where she gets to meet Jedi for like the first time, and she meets her ex-girlfriend again, and you know, she suddenly has to deal with like everything at once, especially at the end, like finding out her mother, the truth about her mother. I found the most interesting stuff was when they revealed her sort of backstory, that like she'd been pretty capable up to now, sort of what you expect, the sort of scrappy, you know, kind of, you know, hauler type character. I was going to say smuggler, but she does it legally. But that she didn't particularly stand out as being anyone like super special in any way. But then they revealed that, oh yeah, I've been constantly like abandoned for certain parts of my life by my mother. She'd always come back for me, but she'd leave me here for a year and then go off and do her own thing. Then we'd meet up again, and she'd send me over here to learn this thing, and so on. So she actually has all this knowledge, all these skills, which she's learned from these kind of places her mother dropped her off. And they reveal that she spent a year with Lorna training in like self-defense, basically. So, you know, she basically considers, it's Auntie Lorna, effectively. So that was an interesting connection to get, that here's a character who actually knows Lorna very well and has been trained by her. Now again, maybe it's just in this book Syl doesn't really get to shine too much in combat, but the implication there would be she's way more skilled than she maybe came across in this book. The action here is kind of brief. It's more focused on the kind of politics surrounding all that than heavy action. Even a lot of the Jedi don't get too much of a chance to do anything particularly impressive. So that's all fine. When she does meet her mother again, you do see the strength of the character is that, you know, now that she's discovered the truth about her mother, that she's actually a Nihil, she supports the Nihil, she still fully believes in everything the sort of mother that she knew thought her, which was that, you know, you don't, you know, kidnap people and do all of this stuff. So she doesn't agree with her mother, and, you know, kind of considers that, you know, she thought her mother was dead all this time, so just still considers it because this person isn't my mother. And like right at the end of the book, you do get a moment where her mother's escaping on the ship, and she's like, you have an opportunity here to surrender and give up this, but she flees. And it's this moment of effectively, I've just watched my mother effectively like abandon me, that she cares more about being a Nihil and escaping to plan again another day than she does about her relationship with me. So it's this moment of just realizing that like I never really did fully know my mother, and I just have to accept that the person I grew up with was very different than the person that she actually was, because of course she never knew her mother went to like military school and trained in hyperspace, this and that, and it was basically allied with the Nihil all this time. It's a very interesting dynamic. By the end of the book, she is given a ship by Xylan Graf, which is part of the deal that her mother makes with the Grafs, that basically her daughter be looked after. So there's definitely the hint that the ship, which is Xylan's ship, basically could have like recording software and stuff like that installed on it, and you know, that's a way to bring those characters back into play. But I do also get the impression that just as much as like her mother was sort of revealed to be this, you know, villainous character, she did fundamentally care about her. It's just that like she's doing all those things, she wanted her on her side, but her safety was sort of the first thing that came to mind for her. So that is a kind of interesting one. I'd be very interested to see where that goes. But again, from the perspective of I'm kind of more interested in Chansey than I am in Syl. Just because, okay, Syl and Jordana are back together now. They're off on their new ship, going their own way. They reveal at the end that they're going to Takodana to meet Maz Kanata. They don't say Maz Kanata, but they say Maz on Takodana, and obviously it's that character because that character is older than Yoda for some reason. So yeah, I still have those questions about Maz, about why they did that, but I guess incorporate the character while you can, even if it's not the best content, referencing the sequels there, but it is what it is. Jordana, let's get into her. She is a member of the Santeca family, but her name isn't Jordana Santeca, it's Jordana like Sparkburner. I guess she's just like related by being like a cousin and stuff like that to the family. And she is the the deputy on this specific planet that basically the Santecas are in control of. So she's been fighting the Nihil for months when we get to meet her. And again, Syl's 18. I think they confirmed Jordana's like 20. So she's this sort of like sheriff like esque character. The way I sort of picture it is, I suppose, sort of like kind of Cara Dune was in like when we saw her in like early season 2 of The Mandalorian, that sort of thing. The kind of sheriff type character almost, that sort of thing. And obviously the reveal about why they broke up was that Jordana Syl asked Jordana to come with her when her time on this planet was done. Because of course it's revealed that she goes from planet to planet because she's always dropped off here. Her mother goes somewhere else, drops her off here. So she had to leave and asked Jordana to come with her. Jordana refused because she has her loyalties to her family, she has her duties as being a Santeca member, and that's what broke off their relationship. It was Jordana who did it, not Syl. And so from that point on, Jordana just did a lot of fighting and missed Syl the entire time. So when they come back into contact with each other, because Vernestra, the Jedi, meet Jordana on the planet, this is where they find the cube, and so they go to Coruscant at the same time as Syl goes to Coruscant with Xylan, because they both need to basically contact the same people, which is where they come back into contact. What I will say is that I did feel that some of the romance scenes between these two were sort of tonally very much in contrast to the arcs of both of these characters. The actual arcs of both of these characters are quite heavy in the sense of like just Syl dealing with her past and just everything happening. It's very chaotic. Versus Jordana and more of, I suppose, this sort of like war PTSD thing where she's become cold and kind of violent because of it. And then they go from these very serious topics to suddenly the two of them are in each other's presence and they're just like really awkward, and it's like they're just all kind of happy sort of around each other, but then there's a little bit of drama because of the characters that they are. I think tonally they should have maybe kept it a little bit more kind of consistent with their characters' arcs. That just stood out a little bit kind of going through it. Otherwise, I actually thought the dynamic that they had was quite interesting, in that like Syl is very sort of, she'll speak her mind straight away. So she's frustrated that Jordana made her decision to break up with her. She didn't want to, and now Jordana's back in her life, and Jordana's obviously showing interest in her again. And initially, Syl is just like, "Well, you broke up before. Like, why do I assume you won't do that again?" And so there's a little bit of standoffishness there. And so the dynamic for the most part over the course of the book is that Jordana's going to do everything she can to sort of prove herself to Syl again, so that they should be a couple again. Again, that contrast between scenes where we're dealing with sort of like PTSD war flashbacks effectively for Jordana, and then her like in the middle of scenes in front of all these characters just like openly like flirting with Syl in front of everyone. There's a little bit of a kind of clash of tones here, especially because I think they have one of the more over-the-top scenes just with the character in terms of I get what they were going for, but I don't think they maybe explained it enough to justify why they went this far with this being the arc. That she's, when I say she's violent at times, they really get across that like, yeah, she has moments of true like brutality in combat that, in the final sequence where they're having the big fight, Jordana's the one who kind of clears the room of Nihil by getting this like old Nihil weapon that she picked up. It's this like disc that she controls through this gauntlet. It's a spinning, disc that just cuts through people. And obviously the idea is that she's absolutely tearing through Nihil with this disc thing. And Vernestra's just like, you need to stop this. This is not who you want to be. And Vernestra has to be a little forceful with her to stop this. Then when they're walking back out, they have to walk past this sort of room, and Syl sees it, and Vernestra's kind of like, she did it. And you get this sort of moment. They say they'll talk about it, but they didn't really, so I guess when those two characters come back, this will have to be addressed. I just thought, like, again, with the way the romance was going, and even Syl's arc, to suddenly just have this other side of things where, like, she's been fighting the Nihil quite a lot, she has a lot of experience with them, and she'll just go into this zone where she suddenly starts, like, massacring the Nihil. It just felt a little out of place for this character, that this character could be like this with Syl, but just be like, I must kill and like tear limbs off people with this weapon at other times. It just felt a bit weird. But overall, like I said, I thought these characters were fine. I just probably would say I probably would have cut off a bit of the content that focused on Syl and Jordana and given more to maybe Wreath, Comac, maybe more focus on Imri and Vernestra. I wouldn't like completely take them out of the book or anything like that, but I didn't feel like you needed to give like as much time to it, just in terms of like, where the main value is going to come from. But I think this is just right now where we're in the middle of the story and we're kind of like, get to the plot. In reflection, we're always going to be like, actually, I would have preferred some more books like this. So, having one book at the very least that's maybe more focused on the sort of new characters introduced uniquely for this book is fine, fair enough. I just had like a few frustrations with it overall. But there are some interesting points coming out of this with Vernestra, and we'll see what they do with the other characters. What it makes me very interested in is that I would like to see Vernestra be the spotlight of one of the adult novels at some point. I know that's sort of where they're doing most of their stuff with Belle, but I'd actually maybe like to see them switch that around, of like, maybe Belle gets to be a focus in an upcoming YA book, Vernestra gets to be the focus in maybe one of the upcoming mainline books. That might be the best way to go forward with things, but they are my thoughts on Star Wars Out of the Shadows. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.